I or tech. All right, I'm Richard Smalley. I'm a professor in the Information Organization Research Group, and this is our second of 3 colloquia this semester, which is really exciting. And our guest today is Eric Elise Morgan, who's the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the University of Notre Dame. He works in that library's newly formed Center for Digital Scholarship. He teaches digital humanities workshops and provides text mining support for students, faculty, and staff. He's been a librarian for a long time. He's dabbled in a lot of things, and he collects water. But be that as it may, Eric.
Very much. Hi. Hi. I want to say thank you for inviting me to share with you some of my ideas today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to hear what you all have to say too, because it's extraordinarily very stimulating. So thank you very much for hosting me. Does anyone? I have dead tree. Does anyone need some dead tree? Okay, we've got some dead tree. I was asked to come and share with you about some of the work that I do at the University of Notre Dame. And what I do a lot is text mining. I do a lot of text mining in digital and a lean towards digital humanities sorts of things. So I can share with you about that. I can talk about that and describe that, and I can do a little bit of demonstrations. I'm also spending a lot of my time recently investigating and writing a book about linked data. My book is supposed to be due in 3 weeks. So I'm more or less on target. So I can chat about that and discuss those sorts of things. But before I go any further, I need to know a little bit more about my audience. I need to know what I can do to make sure that I don't bore you. What can I do to make it so that when you leave that door, you go, that was not a waste of my time? Seriously, what do you want to know? What are some of your expectations? Please tell me. You can't have 0 expectations.
You will explain what digital humanities are for all of us who are...
Explain what digital humanities are. Okay, I can do that.
Are there tools that can be used with digital archives that can do some of the work that you're talking about?
We'll discuss that. Okay?
Can you talk about the role that the library plays specifically in digital humanities on campus along with the
The
faculty?
role of the libraries. That sounds like a good one too.
I'm good.
Oh, you're good? Okay. Yes?
I'm interested in how you are doing your text mining.
How I'm doing my text mining. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And within that, I am particularly interested in what kind of software tools you're working with.
That's a common question. I don't know that I'm going to give as nice an answer as people want.
I can ask.
That's great. No, that's great. And I will do my very best to address those things. And if I don't address them directly right away, don't hesitate to ask them again. Okay? All right? All right, so where am I going to begin here? I'm not going to do a lot of this PowerPoint thing. I'll get to that in a little bit. What is the, I give you a tiny bit of background. I work at the University of Notre Dame. I work in a newly created center that's called the Center for Digital Scholarship. It's a brand new space. It opened up in September. It's not small. Physically, it's large. It's about 5,000 square feet. It's got a bunch of computers in there. It's got a 3D printer, a big scanner, a big printer, a drawing tablet sort of gizmo. We got these TVs, type of things where you can bring your computer and plug it on in and display. We have a funny looking classroom where there's these pods. There's 5 or 6 pods, and people sit around the table, and the instructor sits up here. So some people's backs are to the instructor, so the instructor has to learn to walk around so that everyone can see their face. But we have a classroom. The classroom holds about 20 folk. And then there's a meeting room, a more formal meeting room. All these spaces are available pretty much the whole time the library is open. And we provide 5 or so services on a regular basis in this digital scholarship lab. One is you've got a lot of data. Everyone thinks they have a lot of data. And a gross generalization is scientists have a whirligig, and it's generating lots of data. And they're doing analysis against their whirligig. And then, after they've done their analysis, they have to publish their paper. And increasingly, they're expected to share the data that they use to do their analysis. And their data might be in spreadsheets and simulations and software, and their column 3 says sum A. And if they give away their data and they give you a spreadsheet and says column 3 is sum A, you don't know what that means. And so we as a library help them organize their information better, and then package it up so that they can give it away. That's one service. Another service is, I've got a lot of data, and I need to do my analysis against it. So we have a person who knows much more about statistics than I do, and helps them do statistical analysis against their data. And the data might be, again, from widgets, but it also might be, or from whirligigs, or it also might be from surveys. Then you also might have a lot of data. And your data might be associated with geographic latitudes and longitudes. And therefore you can make a map. And so we also have a GIS lab in this particular space. So we help people do GIS. And then lastly, you might have a lot of data, but the data is in the shape of words. That's where I come in. And people come and they say, I want to look for trends and patterns and anomalies in this set of words. And that's what I help them do. So we do helping people organize their data, helping people analyze their data, helping people map their data, and doing text mining against their data. Those are services, sort of services that we do. And I was hoping to describe to you a little bit about my work in text mining. Okay? So, what is the digital humanities? Text mining is a type of digital humanities. And I would say more than anything else that the digital humanities is not really a discipline, but more like a method, more like a process. It's not a discipline in and of itself, in my opinion. The idea is increasingly content is not analog. Increasingly content is digital. Once it is digital, it becomes much easier to analyze the data, the words, or the pictures, and begin to analyze in the same way scientists might analyze words, analyze the number of leaves on a tree. It begins, for example, it might be with pictures. Let's just take pictures. Let's have a digital picture. It's entirely possible to look through all the pixels in that particular picture and determine its general color. In general, this pixel is blue. In general, this pixel is red. Okay, well now I go to the next one. Next pixel. Well, this pixel is more or less red. This pixel is more or less blue. Well, it sounds stupid, but I can go through all those things, and then I can make a generalization about that particular picture. Say, this is a blue picture. But you can go further and say, this picture has these sorts of shapes in it. Have you ever seen Google's, it's almost scary. You can take a photograph and you can feed it to Google Images, and it comes back with other pictures that look a lot like the picture you fed it. It's the same thing. Now let's suppose you're an art historian. And let's suppose that you have a whole lot of paintings, pictures of paintings. Well, and you know that these paintings over here were all by Impressionists. And then you've got this other painting over here. Well, as a person, you could look at that particular painting and say, yes, that's Impressionistic style or not. But you could also feed it to a computer program, and the computer program might be able to come back and say, does it have the same sort of characteristics as all these paintings over here? And the reason you can do that is because the stuff is digital to begin with. You can analyze the digitized whatever. Another example, you might be able to do this with music. That I have a digital version of the music, And if I digitize that, and then I can put this into a computer program, and the music will have a shape. Well, I can bring in different works, and they would have different shapes, or they'd have similar shapes. And again, I can begin to compare and contrast music en masse. That's one of the exciting things about this, is that once you have these digitized things, you can analyze a lot of stuff very quickly. A lot of it began, this digital humanities stuff kind of sort of began with 1965-ish with a Catholic priest. I think his name is Busa. He lived in Italy. I think he just died. And he was into Thomas Aquinas. He was a Catholic priest. And he took all of Thomas Aquinas' works, and he worked with IBM, and he says, I want to create a concordance of all these works. And so they did this work, and the story is that we needed little army trucks to carry around all the little cards, because this was in 1965, to do his concordance. And I think the big joke was the most frequently used words in Thomas Aquinas was the word the. But the point is that he was doing this in 1965, so he's considered the father of the digital humanities. About 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the digital humanities started picking up. That there was increasingly more content available. And so more content is digitized, more analysis can be done, people have more computers on their desktops, everything seems to be maturing a little bit more. TEI, which is a markup language for texts, had demonstrated a lot of potential, but other people were coming along and doing interesting things. Natural language processing was becoming a bigger deal, and tools were being available out there for that. And so all this stuff sort of fed together, the digital humanities got to be a bigger deal. The digital humanities, it's not a discipline, but some people sort of think it is, now has scholarly journals, professional associations, international annual meetings, so I think that you would say that it is maturing. And I spend a lot of my time doing text analysis. But I guess before I get to that, there are other characteristics too. I have the content, and I do some sort of analysis against it. But other times people think the digital humanities, and I don't disagree with them, is sometimes about using technology to do humanities work. Let's suppose I want to create a critical edition of something. Well, in the past, I would read, I would reread, I would take lots of notes, and I would end up with a book. Great, wonderful. But maybe I could read, reread, annotate, and then make the whole thing a website. And then, not only can I critique and have my annotations about this particular item, but I can let other people add and critique, and so they can turn into great big discussions. So sometimes digital humanities stuff manifests itself as making websites. We don't do that yet in our center, because one thing is those websites have infrastructure underneath them. Computers, hardware, software, databases, any one particular computer type program. And those things change. And so they cost dollars and time and money to maintain these things. Whereas if I have a book, we'll see a book, I can pretty much put it on the shelf and I'm kind of done with it. But with the computer thing, it kind of moves through time and work has to be done underneath, and we haven't figured out how to deal with that ongoing cost. That's the beginnings of what I have shared. Are there questions, comments? So I elaborated on something. Please ask a question. Yes, sir.
How did you scale up to the services you're able to offer today?
How how were we able to scale up?
Yes. Where did you start, and what was the process to get to this dedicated space you have now?
Okay. I'm not the leader, I just work there.
Okay.
What happened is that other services became less important. I didn't say they became unimportant, they became less important. And one of the services that became less important was the reference collection. It just wasn't used as much. It had been gotten smaller and gotten smaller and gotten smaller, and then it got into this core size. And so there was a space that wasn't really being used and a service that wasn't really being used as much as it used to be. That's one thing that happened. Another thing happened is that the libraries had an administrative change, and a new director came in, reorganized the libraries, new priorities were set, different priorities were set, and they came from an institution that already had one of these digital humanities scholarship centers. And then it just so happened that the administration said, well, we'll give you some cash, you put in some cash, and they basically plopped down a space. So they basically took what used to be a lot of the reference area, moved it to a different location, and filled in the particular space. And so now the space is renovated, the space is furnished, and there's ongoing dollars for the people who work there, but there's not a whole lot of ongoing dollars for expanding services.
Were the staff reorganized for the digital humanities? So it wasn't new staff, it was the existing
No,
staff?
well, it started out with some people who were reorganized, and it was supplemented with additional.
When you're looking at tools for your digital humanities space, do you focus more on open source software, or are you looking at some managed solutions?
That's a good question. The question was, to what degree do we use open source software versus vended or managed types of things? It's a combination. A lot of the geographic information system software it seems to be dominated by a vendor called Esri. And so everything seems to come in and out of them. Now, apparently there are a few open source software thingies, but also the university very recently licensed me a site license for this particular application, so that's the one we're using more. When it comes to the statistical types of analysis tools, a combination of things are used, but I believe we're leaning more towards, oh gosh, it starts with an S.
SAS or SPSS?
Not, I'm embarrassed to say that I don't remember the name of the application. Stata. Thank you. It's one of those S tools. Stata. We lean towards Stata, but then there's other ones across campus like R, which is also recently used. There aren't a whole lot of text mining types of applications, vended types of things. There's lots of software out there, and a lot of it, some of it is free, some of it is open source. But I don't think that the methods have matured enough that there are enough tools to really do what people think it needs to be done. So it's a combination of open source and things. Very good. All right, well, let me share a little bit about text mining. It's kind of a hierarchy, and it sounds really silly, but it starts out with counting. It really all begins with counting. People will bring to me texts, it doesn't really matter, and the first thing that the text has to be digitized. It has to be words. It can't be a facsimile. It can't be a picture. It has to have been OCR. Now, sometimes the OCR gets in the way, and it really makes for ugly sort of stuff. On the other hand, it's all consistently dirty, and so sometimes the errors just sort of like fade away into the background. But what you do first is you simply count. Now, I know it's not going to sound dumb, but you can count the number of words that are in a document. They might be a tweet, might be a Facebook posting, it might be an article, it might be a book, it might be songs or hymns or whatever text that you want. Now, so what that this thing has 1,000 words. But let's suppose that you have a collection of many documents. Then you count the number of words that are in each document. Well, now I can I know which one has the least amount of words, I know which one has the most amount of words, and I can create an average. And then I can pick a document out of the pile and say, this one's long, or this one's short. And I go, well, who cares? Well, let's suppose in library land, that instead of counting the number of pages we had in a book, you would count the number of words that render book, because number of pages, I might have the same book, and it might have different numbers of pages in it. I think it would be interesting to denote in our descriptions that this book is this number of words long. And then you could say, I want to search for philosophy books that are short, as opposed to longer ones, because you might have less time. That's entirely possible. Or you might say, in general, a longer document is probably going to be more detailed, so I might want a longer one. Now, that's a silly example. But once I count the words, the next thing I can do is I can tabulate the words. So not only do I have a list of how many words there are, but what words are in this thing and how many times do those particular words appear. So this word, the, it counts for this 25 times, is in there 50 times, but red is in there twice, and God is in there 5 times. And what you can do, now that I have a long list of all the words in a document, and the number of times each word appears, I can then sort the list. I can sort the list by frequency, which words appear the most, and yes, you can take out the stop words, so that I only have the meaningful ones left. And the words that appear at the top give you an idea of what that text is about. It's not going to tell you everything, but it's going to give you an idea. And then if you sort the list alphabetically, you might find out that there's library, librarian, librarianship, libraries. And again, you get the idea of a feel of what the text is. And that's just counting singular words. But it's just as easy to count what we call n-grams, bigrams, trigrams, quadgrams, 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases, 4-word phrases, 5-word phrases. If one word carries this much meaning, does twice as many words carry twice as much meaning? Oh, that's a joke. But a lot of times meaning isn't carried in a single word. A lot of times meaning is carried in phrases. And so you can do the same thing. You can count this many times so the phrase appears and begin to get an idea of what's going on. Those two things have absolutely nothing to do with real meaning of the words. They just count words. And it's called a bag of words approach. You just have bunches of words that are in a great big pile and you just pull the words out. The next level is concordancing. Who knows what concordance is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, concordance. A concordance is a tool that was developed in the 1200s. And what it was is I'm going to select a word out of my corpus of documents. I'm going to put it in the middle of my page. And then I'm going to find that word in my document, and I'm going to look at the 4 or 5 or 6 words on either side of that word, and I'm going to put it on either side of my selected word. I'm going to do that for every single time the word appears in my concordance and my documents, and I'm going to end up with this list. And it's essentially a keyword in context index. And this way you can begin to get an idea. This is the same sort of thing that Busa created in 1965, and it's the same sort of thing I can create on my computer now. And the computer now, I can write that program in 25 lines of code or less. And I can make it concordance real fast. It's a cool tool. So all 3 of those tools have nothing to do with meaning. But the next level up, you can start to do meaning. Words and language follow patterns. If there weren't patterns, you wouldn't be able to understand what I'm saying. Everything will be, what do I mean? But I speak in some sort of coherent something, and you understand my meaning. It follows patterns. There are rules. There's rules in written language. And let's just take English as an example. Every sentence begins with a... What? No. A capital letter, yay! And every sentence ends in a, or some sort of other punctuation mark. Okay? If I have the letters big M, little r, period, what's the next word?
Proper
A name of some sort. All personal pronouns, all names of people begin with capital letters. In general, past tense verbs end in and adverbs sort of kind of end in,
No,
and a gerund sort of ends in.
ing.
All of these things can be coded into a computer program. And then what you can do is you can begin to feed a text to a computer program, and the computer program will come back and give you probabilities that this word is a noun, this word is an adjective, this word is a verb, this is an end of the sentence punctuation mark. Big whoop. But then I go back to step one. I can count. How many nouns do I have? How many adjectives do I have? How many adverbs do I have? Are there a preponderance of the word said in this particular document? Are there a preponderance of colors in this particular document? Is this document colorful or not? You can begin to do that sort of thing. You can, when you pull out the nouns, there's nouns or noun phrases. There's things called, sometimes these are called entities. And you do what's called named entity extraction. And this pulls out things like Paris, Rome, Finn, Huckleberry, last week, this week, $67. And now I can pull out these named entities and I can begin to draw more associations. Where does this particular thing take place? What sorts of dates and times are mentioned in the document? Here's this book called The Adventures of Marco Polo, and it's got these little dates in it. And he mentions these particular places. Well, I can pull out all those names and places, maybe, and then maybe I can look them up in some sort of gazetteer, and then maybe I can pull out some sort of geographic locations, and then I make maybe a little map of where he went throughout the book, and I can supplement the text. Now, in that particular case, you might go, well, who cares? I already know where he went. He went to China and back. But let's suppose that you have a book that you don't know about. And you can read the book. I advocate reading the book. But you can also use these sorts of tools to do some sort of analysis again above the book ahead of time. Or you take a particular book and you find out what things are important, and then you could make a graph illustrating where that word or phrase appears in the book. And so I'm reading this book, and the very first sentence is, "Call me Ishmael." Hey, who's Ishmael? Should I pay attention to who Ishmael is? Let me consult my little computer analysis program. Oh, look, he's mentioned a lot. I better pay attention to Ishmael. Okay? It could raise, so you can use these sorts of tools to get an idea of what's going to happen. Or maybe you could read the book or the texts or a pile of texts, and then you can use the tool afterwards to confirm what you may or may not have supposed. It's an additional reading sort of tool. So I started off with counting and tabulating. I did concordancing. I then did parts of speech analysis. I did a named entity extraction analysis. And then the next things, further on get down, the more difficult it gets. The next level down is called sentiment analysis. So here I'm going to have a pile of texts, and these were first kind of done against movie reviews. So I have this movie review. And you can, certain words have connotations. Now let's suppose that some words have a negative connotation and other words have a positive connotation. Now let's also suppose that some words have a more negative connotation than other words. Now, let's just arbitrarily add quantitative values to that. So let's just say for the word, for argument's sake, that the word good has a positive connotation of 0.5. And let's suppose that the word great has a positive connotation of 0.75. Now, a really trivial and almost naive way to do sentiment analysis is to go through a text, look at each sentence, count the number of words in there, pull out the words that are like adjectives, look up the adjective in my dictionary, and find out that this word is worth 0.5, and this one's 0.75, and this one's worth 3.3, and I add them all up and have a score that's above 0. This thing is, generally speaking, a positive statement. It breaks down, though, because you might have the word not. in the middle of your sentence, and it negates the whole thing. So you can sort of, that's a naive way to do it.
Is the text mining, like the word good can mean differently in different context? And if you use text mining, it means you need to change something.
Sometimes.
And how, sometimes the human does not really
That's where the researcher comes into play, and they do lots of different types of experiments where they have people come by and give scores to particular things, and then they try to model that with the computer program, and until the people and the computer programs sort of match and jive, then they think that they have a good model. But again, the things that I'm discussing, the further I get down the list, the more complicated and the less exact that they become. So I'm able to give you a 100% concrete answer. Then the next level down after that is classification and cataloging. The idea is I have a pile of text and I want to make them into smaller piles. And that can sometimes happen by, there's two ways that they talk about doing this. One is called classification and the other one is called clustering. In the clustering model, you have a pile of documents, and this is how a thing called mallet works. You have a pile of documents, and I say, I want you to take these documents, and I want you to make 3 piles out of them. And then it goes through, and it finds out which words appear with which documents most frequently, and it does this over and over and over and over and over again, and it comes up with 3 piles, and you'll end up with 3 lists. Each list will have 5 or 6 words in it, and then each word will be associated with the number of documents. And it says all these documents, these things are on the same pile. That's clustering. Cataloging type of classification type of thing is I'm going to have, it's like Dewey. I'm going to have 10 broad classifications, and I want you to take this document and stuff it into one of those piles. The clustering is the thing that happens more than the classification. So those are an idea of how this is working. Yes, sir.
So the clustering is done more often than classification. Do you think that's because it's easier to do?
I don't know why one is done more than the other one. I would be willing to bet that the clustering, as opposed to the classification, could be done more on a mathematical basis because it doesn't really take into account the meanings of the words. Whereas if I have a classification type approach, I have to know what science and technology mean in order to put in tractors into that particular class. So there's lots of meanings beside. But if I were to guess, that's what I would think.
Me too, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me give you some examples of what we've done. Here's a silly one. About 3 or 4 years ago, I have a liberal arts education. I'm very into the liberal arts education. And there's this set of books called the Great Books of the Western World. And the goal of this set of great books was to facilitate discussion. It was supposed to facilitate discussion on 102 great ideas. Love, honor, truth, justice, God, angels, literature, philosophy, war, peace, religion, justice. And the idea was, these are concepts that in at least in the Western tradition have been discussed since forever. These are big ideas. Okay? And they said that we need to discuss these ideas. And we're going to create a set of books that you read these books and then discuss them. You will continue the liberal arts discussion. Okay, that was the goal of the great books. And in the very beginning of the book, it said, a great book is a book that discusses many of these 102 ideas deeply. So if there's a book and it discusses love a lot, well, that's okay. But if it discusses love a lot and religion a lot, then it is greater than the first book. Okay? Well, I said, I can do that. I can collect all the great books. I have a list of the 100 great ideas. I can then count the number of times the word love appears in one document. I can compare it to how long that document is. I can then compare it to how many times the word love appears in the entire corpus of my document, and I can end up with a relevancy ranking score for the word love for this particular book. So let's suppose I did that, and here's a book, and it has a score of 5. And I take the next big great idea, honor. I count the number of times honor appears in the book, how many appears in the rest of the book, and I have an honor score of 11. 5 plus 11 is 16. And I do that for 102 ideas, and every book then ends up with a great books coefficient. Okay? Okay, it was silly. And I could have improved by having synonyms for love and antonyms for love. And I had to account for the fact that some of these things started out in Greek, and they've been translated into a million types of things. I understand, but that wasn't the problem, that was the point. But I really wanted to find out which book was the greatest. Which book was the greatest? So it was Aristotle's Politics, I think was the greatest book. It probably discussed a lot of the ideas very deeply. Now, try to guess who wrote 9 of the top 10 books when it comes to love. I'll give you a hint. All the authors in this set are by dead white men. It's not that hard.
The Bible.
No, that's a good guess. Shakespeare. If you want to know about love in all of its different manifestations, you could read Shakespeare. Okay? I think the book that came across as the most about war was some sort of American treatise, some sort of government document from the United States. Well, that was silly, but the real idea was this. A couple of ideas. I asked myself, I've got 3.5 million books in my library. Maybe I could find a greater book, or a different set of great books. Or, more importantly, why don't I try to apply this same technique to other disciplines? Say I'm in biology, and say I have 1,000 articles. And suppose I articulated my own personal vocabulary about what's important about biology. I could then go through this and go through each word in my biology vocabulary and do the same sorts of calculations against all my journal articles. And even though I've done the perfect literature search, I've used all the right words, I've searched all the right databases, and I still end up with 1,000 articles. Using a tool like this, I can begin to analyze my content in a different sort of way. That was my great books idea. I put it out on the concourse in the library, and this was about 4 years ago, and I put little sticky notes so people could comment. There was a lot of literature. People said, you can't do that. That's really bad. This is wrong. And a business guy came up and said, I care less about the results. I just want to know about the method that they used underneath. Those great books. Okay, let's do a couple others here. Perceptions of China. There's a faculty member. They take students to China on a regular basis. She has them find an image of China, and then she has them write a paragraph that describes what they think about China. She collects all of those. And then they go to China, and when they come back, she says, now find an image and write a paragraph. And she wants me to find patterns between set 1 and set 2. I think I'll be able to do that. That one's just getting started. There was another one. A student comes to me, and she's doing her senior paper, and she says, I think I've identified a trend. Oh, yes? What's that trend? I think it's increasingly popular to go visit slums. I go, okay. Yes, I've identified 40 different websites that advertise, come visit our slum. Okay. I want to analyze these 40 different websites and try to find out some sort of patterns that are going on in there. Okay. So, using her computer, and with hardly any sort of software that already came on her computer, she had 40 URLs. She fed those 40 URLs to a computer program, and it sucked down all the HTML from those 40 websites. Now she had a corpus. Then with another computer program on her script, she She ran another little computer program and got rid of all the HTML. Now she had just plain text. Then she started feeding this plain text into a computer program called Voyant, which makes little word clouds and makes little charts and graphs. And she got started there. And then I wrote a little computer program for her that would do concordancing and do tabulation of phrases. And she did this analysis, and she started making word clouds, and she started noticing that the word you was mentioned an awful lot in these particular texts. And her thesis is, what the people say is, imagine if you were here, then this is what you would see. And then once they have that in their brain, they're more likely to come visit. And it's not like you come and visit the slum for a good time. You go and visit the slum, and these places are in Brazil, South and Africa. And the idea is, come visit our slum and learn about poverty. Come visit our slum, learn about education and how these people aren't educated, and maybe you can help us educate these particular people. So that was another example of how we use text mining. A couple of weeks ago, a man comes to me and he says, I have hymns. Oh, that's cool. You got the music? No. Well, when were these written? The 4th century. Oh, okay. Guess there wasn't much music at that time. He brings me these 4 hymns, or these 14 hymns, and he says, I think these fall into this pile, and these fall into this pile, and these fall into this pile. I go, okay, I'll see what I can do. And they weren't very long. And each hymn was not even in front of a piece of paper. It was all Latin. I couldn't read a word of it. But I found a bit of a program that would begin to help me get rid of stop words in Latin and do some grammar stuff against Latin. And I did my little statistical analysis against Latin, against the text, and it brought back a list of the most significant words, and I couldn't read a single word it was. And he goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Look, that was faith, Christ, God, guilt. I guess my program picked out the right words. But I was able to put them into piles because he really didn't have enough stuff. Another example. Very recently, a man comes from the University Administration, and he has to give a talk. The talk happens tomorrow, and there's this thing called the state trials. These happened at least from 1650 to 1700, and they happened in United Kingdom, England. And there's all sorts of trials about someone stole my cow, to this guy killed somebody else, to treason, and to big monopolies that are trampling on little people. And what he wanted to do is analyze these trials and try to pick out patterns that he didn't find before. And so we did some of this sort of work, and we did the various sorts of clustering sorts of things. We indexed the entire content. We made a timeline of the results. We made lots of charts and graphs. And the point is that he had this many texts that he wanted to read and analyze. We formed a team of people that all brought their own little skills to the thing, and we were able to do a different type of analysis against the result. I guess one of the things I really want to point out about all this work is that it's really not, there's a couple things. It's not a replacement for reading. I'm never going to say that. I'm never going to say that. But imagine that you are in, it's 400 AD. And what, do they have books in 400 AD? But you got a scroll. Okay, you got the scroll thing. Now with a scroll, you kind of sort of have to start at the beginning and move to the end. It's hard to just automatically move to almost the end of the book. Okay? Then this codex thing comes along. Look, I can open up the book real quickly to any spot. You can't do that. You have to read from the beginning to the end. That's the way it was designed. Well, maybe we've gotten over that. Now the text is electronic. read the book. But maybe we can use these sorts of tools to do additional types of reading. I sort of imagine this. I like writing in my books. So I imagine a book. I can hardly ever write without a pencil. And I'm sitting there, and I'm scribbling, and I'm drawing, and I'm taking up notes. But then I also imagine, I also have a gizmo over here that I kind of go back and forth to the thing. My name is Ishmael. Okay. Call me Ishmael. Who's Ishmael? Oh, okay, I guess I'll pay attention to Ishmael. And I go back and forth to this sort of book, themes. I can see that. Or maybe it's one gizmo, and I'm reading and analyzing and reading and analyzing at the same time. But I don't like that because I want to draw in my book. So I think that's one thing that's going on. But another thing that's going on is that all of this text mining stuff is exactly like a thermometer. It just gives you measurements. It just gives you observations. It is up to you to put the whole thing into context. Suppose that there were a thermometer outside this little window right here. And what today might that thermometer reading be? 61. Wonderful, it's 61 degrees. And you would look out there, and at this time of year, and this, we might go, yay! But if it was January of this year, and it said 61 degrees, you'd be going,
Yay.
but you'd also be going, wow, I'm really surprised, this is unusual. Or if it's July and it rains 32, you're going to see something else. That's exactly what this is about. And just because the word God appears this many times doesn't really mean anything. You have to put it into some context. Okay? So it's just a new kind of reading, and that's the introduction to text mining. Questions, comments?
I have a project that Michael Zimmer and I have been working on where we've been taking some digital discourse, so blogs, etc., that targeted a public library for intellectual freedom challenges.
Targeted.
So
So writing a blog against intellectual freedom.
right, so they want the librarians to remove these particular materials.
Okay.
So so it becomes a rather significant series of events. So we've collected all of this.
Great.
Right? And so our idea is now, the idea is to create an archive of the event that can support research about why these kinds of discourses emerged. So, one of the things I was thinking of looking at is how the changes in the discourse about intellectual freedom have changed.
Yes.
Because of inflamed language. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be
You can count that sort of stuff.
yeah, and then look at the proximities of what words go with the inflammatory words. I
Right.
think. So that's that's a kind of a
You would create a dictionary of, you could start off with one that's existing, but you would essentially create a dictionary. These are the sorts of words or concepts that I think exemplify discourse against intellectual freedom. And then you can then begin to look to see where those things begin to appear. And then you can look for words on either side of those words that are near and begin to count and measure and maybe grade. This one is very much against, and this one is not so much against. Yeah, it's very comfortable.
good. Thank you. That's encouraging.
Let me do the tiniest of demonstrations to see where some of this is going. No, don't touch the screen. Okay, thing, do your deal. Okay, great. Okay, let's see what I can do. For example, let's see here. This is tricky. Why did I decide to do this? dh.crc.nd.edu/sandbox. Typing in the dark. Here I have a bunch of tools that I'm working on. Let's do this one for a good time. PDF to text. Now, we have a whole pile of, people have PDF documents all over the place. Great, wonderful. Now let's suppose you have a whole pile of PDF documents and you've got to read them. this tool begins to help you do some textual analysis against the result. So I'm going to choose a file, and I'm going to choose this book here, this PDF document here, and say go. Now what it will do, every time you do a computer demonstration, something goes wrong, might connect it to the net. What it's doing is that the program is sucking up this book called guidebook.pdf. It's then going to try to extract all of the words from the underlying PDF document. And then it's going to create a goofy little report. I need graphic design help. But here is the text of my document, and now I can do textual analysis against it. So I have a JSTOR article. It comes to me as a PDF document. I begin to do this sort of stuff. So where's my mouse? Okay. When you count and tabulate, and you can begin to get scores against your books or texts. In general, would we agree that Dr. Seuss is easy to read? Yes? It's easy to read in general because there's not a very big vocabulary, there's not very many unique words, the sentences are very short, the whole book is rather short. In general, would you say that insurance documents are easy or difficult to read? Difficult. They're long, they're dense, the sentences are terrible. Okay? You can count that stuff. And in the 50s and 60s, there were a few people who created algorithms. Depending on how long the sentence is, how many sentences there are in a paragraph, how many paragraphs there are, how many unique words there are in a particular document, all this sort of stuff, and I can say that this is an easy or hard document. This particular thing says that my document has a score of 47, which basically puts it right in the middle, from easy to hard. Okay? Now 47 doesn't mean anything. Maybe 42 does, but 47 doesn't. Then here's another algorithm that does the same thing, and you can see that the arrow is still sort of in the middle. Meaning this is probably a document that's easily readable by most people, or the average reader. Okay? Again, it's a little score that you can apply against your document. But if you have a whole pile of books, this is an opportunity for a librarian. I can not only put into my cataloging record the number of words that are in a document, I want a short one or a long one, but I can also put in, I want an easy one or a more difficult one. Wouldn't that be an interesting source search? Philosophy, short and easy. You might need it. Okay? All right. But the text I've also did the tedious bit of making a word cloud. So in this particular document, the word date, don't touch the screen. The particular document, data and web and RDF and Sparkle and links and HTTP are the words that are used a lot. I begin to get an idea about what the book is about. And the idea here is that I can click on one of these things and it'll come back and give me a concordance of how that word is used throughout the whole thing. And I can make a little map and I can illustrate that the word RDF used a lot, about 20% of the way through and 90% of the way through, but here the word RDF isn't used a whole lot. Go back. Where's my mouse? And if one word carries some meaning, then maybe multiple words carry additional meaning. No, not really, but here are the most frequently used bigrams. And then down at the bottom, I have the beginnings of the thing. What do they do in this document? Well, they do a lot of creating, they do a lot of linking, they do a lot of scribing. And the idea is that you can click on one of these things and it will pull back famous last words. All of the sentences that contain that word. Let's try this one. Link. Let's try link. Every time you do a computer demonstration, it goes wrong. The idea was it would pull back all the sentences, but not necessarily contain the word link, but all the variations of that verb. Link, linked, links, linking, and you get an idea of what's going on. This tool is designed to help people doing digital humanities sort of stuff to get started. There's also this thing over here, Analyze with Voyant. Voyant is a popular tool. It's created by a guy that now works in Montreal. And what it does is it pulls in your text, and then you can make it so that it counts the number of words. It does count in here, and then it'll make a little word cloud illustrating what words were used and how much. And then by clicking on one of the little words here, I can start making a little graph illustrating that the word data is used a lot, about 4/10 of the way through the book. Now, who cares? Well, in another book, I'm not going to take the time to do it, there's Walden. There's a guy named Thoreau. He hangs out by a pond for 18 months, and he writes. And if you do this word cloud thing, the word man and men appear a lot. So does the words house and pond. And when you click on pond, it makes a little graph, and then you can put in additional words down here, and it will make it add to the graph. So what I did data there, so I'm going to do word linked. I'm just guessing. It didn't work. Did I spell it right? Linked. Aha! And I can begin to see that there is a similarity between the word data and linked. Well, my book's about linked data. Okay. But in Thoreau's book, pond is a significant word. It makes a little chart, and then when you type in the word ice, it follows the same sort of pattern. And you can begin to see patterns of how particular ideas or phrases are used in the book. This can help you read. This can help you read. Here's a different one. Well, I'm almost done. Let's try this. We all know the Hottie Trust. Hottie Trust, digitize lots of stuff. Let's put our stuff into a great big pile so that it stays around for forever. All that's very well and good. Let's create a catalog so I can see this sort of stuff. Yes, yeah, you can see the thing, but you go off and can't download it. Kind of a pain, but whatever. And then they created a subsection of this thing called the High Trust Research Center. They have a subset of the public domain documents, and they provide services against this set of public domain documents. I can log in here, go in, I'm going to authorize myself. And I have already created what they call work sets. I did some searches. Here's some things that I'm interested in. And I created one called Emerson, Emerson's Common Separated Values, Love, Honor, Truth, Justice. Here's a test one, here's a Walden one. And all these other ones are made by other people. These are mine, and all these other are here. I see mine because I'm me, but other people don't really see mine. But then you can do these algorithms against it. And it's smaller and bigger to read, but the first one is Mark Downloader. So what you can do is you can create a set of documents that you're interested in, and then you can run this downloader against it, and it will give you all the marked records describing those things. Now, I've got marked records describing those things. It contains authors, titles, dates, subjects. Well, I can begin to do analysis against that. And if I just put my brain to it, I can feed all those marked records to the computer program and make a timeline illustrating when they were published. I really would rather have a timeline of when they were written or conceived, but that's a different story. You can do all these sorts of things against it. So for example, I have a pile of results, and I'm going to look at this one, I think. Do it. Every time you know, that's not the right one. Let's try this one. Okay, now this is, it's not beautiful, but here's a set of words. Now basically what I did is I created a pile of works that were both by Thoreau or Emerson. The guy's name was Ralph Waldo Emerson or Henry David Thoreau, but I created a body of works. And then it used what's called a Dunning analysis. Dunning something else. Dunning created this analysis tool. And the idea was which words or phrases appear a lot in both documents, In other words, which documents were like surprisingly important in both documents. And this set of things represents the number of words that were surprisingly not in both documents. So again, you can get the idea of what's going on. So if I find you this overrepresented one, it's a really bad example, probably because of stop word problems. But it's also, there's a lot of French in here. So these are probably things, these are surprises. These are words that you don't really expect. And but just by counting words, you can do different sorts of things. One more. Okay, we all know JSTOR. Yummy, yummy. But it didn't go to the right address. DFR. Here's a thing called data for research. This is free. Anybody can use this. And this is the totality of JSTOR's content. It's now searchable with a simply very rudimentary or simple faceted interface. So I can search for Walden. And now it came back and says there are 17,000 items that have the word Walden in. But I can begin to do something like this. Make a little chart out of the thing. And what this illustrates is that there weren't very many Walden things here, but then later on there were a whole pile of Walden things. So over time it shows me how, it's kind of like Google's Ngram sort of deal going on here. That's very well cool and interesting. But if I put in the word, what you can do though, is I can put in a different search, get this same sort of graph, and it's downloadable at the bottom. They give me this data to actually download the thing. I can make the same sort of, I can put in a different word, and I can begin to see trends, that this idea was published a lot and then it fell down, or something like that. That's so very interesting. Finally, with this JSTOR thing, you can do what's called export this data. You can do the best search possible. And then you can, they give you the option of downloading all the citations, all the bigrams, all the trigrams, all the quadgrams, the statistically significant keywords, and complete bibliographic citations. But it comes to you in a comma separated value, and it's kind of hard to read. But dh.crc.nd.edu/sandbox. Sandbox, B-O-X, go. JSTOR tool. So here, I'm beginning to write a program that once you download your data for research data, you can feed it to this thing. And I already have a thing that I've already done. Oh, no, I didn't want to download it. And this is an example. And in that data that it gave me, there were a pile of citations. And then I can go and look at the keywords in that particular article. I can see how the word student was used in that particular thing, and apparently it wasn't used very much in my program, maybe broke. But I can do a concordancing against it. I can analyze my thing with Voyant, and the idea will be, and make a timeline. Now in this particular case, I limited all my articles to a very small period of time, so they're all appearing in a very small period of time. But if you did some sort of search and they appeared over a long period of time, you might be able to see clusters of how things were published over time. So these are, the point I'm trying to make is, we have lots of data already available to us. It comes to us in various forms. I think another step for us as librarians is to take the data that people bring to us and provide tools for them so that they can read and analyze these documents to a greater degree. So there's opportunities in library land for this sort of stuff. It's very hot in here. And that is more, I want to share one more thing. When Galileo was alive, fabrics were the big thing. let's make these cloths. And people had these little magnifying glasses. And they would look down at their cloth, and they would count the number of times the threads there were in a particular amount of space. And the more threads there were, the more valuable the cloth was. Well, that's great. And what was the tool being used for? Well, the tool was being used for commerce. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But Galileo comes along and goes, that's an interesting thing, huh? I like that tool. Computer. That's an interesting tool. It's a computer. And I go, huh, I'm going to improve on that tool. And instead of looking down, I'm going to look up. And he looks up. And what does he see? He looks at the moon. Oh, look, the moon's got mountains. It's not perfectly smooth. Oh, no, there's Jupiter. Oh, look, there's these little dots, and they go around Jupiter. Maybe Jupiter has moons. Look, Venus goes through phases just like the moon does. I wonder if it goes around the sun. And what he did is he used a tool to do a different type of observation. That's exactly what's going on here. Instead of using our computer to do things like writing email and doing whatever, let's take this computer thing and use it to evaluate the human expression and look at new ways of what it means to be human. That's what text writing in digital humanities is all about. Did I answer your questions? Please. Are there any more?
Just something struck me as I was listening to you. Has anybody come to you yet with 6 or 7 different translations of a particular work that was written originally in another language to evaluate which one might be closer to the original?
No one has brought that to me. I'm pretty sure that has been done. I wouldn't be able to point to the person to do it. But that would be an example of what would be done in this sort of analysis. An analysis of that is called stylometrics. The idea is that you look at a text and you begin to find out its underlying characteristics of, how many long their sentences were, what words they use more frequently, or whether they use various types of pronunciations. And then you can sometimes find out whether or not this thing's a forgery or not. Well, we attributed this to Shakespeare, but we're finding out that it was really, what was the other guy? Right down Shakespeare's time.
Johnson?
No, Bacon. It doesn't matter, it's somebody else. Or sometimes there are works that were begun by a particular person and then ended by a different person, and you can see the stylistic changes, the same sort of deal. Thank you.
In this wonderful sandbox,
My sandbox, yes, sir.
is that proprietary or can we play with it?
You can go in there and do whatever it is you want to.
I was trying to make
Your mileage may vary.
I was trying to make a claim recently that the use of prayer has decreased in European and American literature over the course of time. I said, how do I even begin to make that claim? My professor says that Google has sort of a text mining.
Engrams,
Yes.
Google engrams might be what he was alluding to. Go on, I'm listening.
Do you have experience with this? What do you think about it?
I think that's entirely possible, and no, I don't have any exact experience with
Okay.
it. Oh, where's my mouse?
Here's a video again, I use it in the classes. It gives you just a taste of it.
The idea with this particular tool is that you put in words, and they put in Einstein, Shakespeare, Sherlock Holmes, and Frankenstein, and then it illustrates how those words were used through time. You could probably, I'm just gonna, prayer, okay? And I see that over time it changed in some ways. But you have to also take into account, was the volume of documents greater at this end than it was up here, or things like that. So it's not just mere counts, but you also have to make percentages and ratios.
Yeah, that's showing the percentages.
Excuse me? This is showing the
Right there is
percentages?
the percentages.
You gotta do that. Okay, I'm here all month. Thank you very much for your time.